We're going to talk about the proposal which this network graciously cast its benevolent eye upon, and say a little bit about our thinking in it, say a bit about what we'd plan to do over the next few months, and put out a few provocations, a little bit of a description of the work that we've already done, and then hopefully allow a good space for discussion at the end. You know Owen, you know me, we're very good at finding a very concise way of expressing ourselves in the fewest numbers of words, so there'll be a lot of space at the end for others to talk, if you're lucky. So I think our proposal arose not out of criticism particularly of this network, in fact quite the opposite in some ways. In some ways we wanted to dramatise some of what we thought were the interesting developments coming in discussion in this network, but certainly to examine some of the problematic affairs that we see in the wider world. Owen and I developed and discussed concerns as to what counts as musical material that is made available for listening algorithms. We developed concerns about the, if you will, the ontological fixity that's often in a lot of people's work, the separations of human from machine, from one thing from another, and the allocation of capabilities and essences to each other in a non-relational way. We became concerned about that. We became concerned about a kind of partitioning of production from reception, of making music from listening to it, and those sorts of affairs. So we thought we'd take quite a radical stance to problematise all of that, and hopefully open up a creative space in which we, as researcher, artists, ne'er-do-wells, could actually do some stuff and reflect on it, both doing research and art making at the same time. And in particular, I hope you'll see that there's some quite specific methods that we're going to employ, if method's the right word, which draw on art and design traditions, which we're bringing to the party. Every now and then you will see some images appear. There's a series of 4 which were generated by 5 two-dimensional Turing machines writing pixels to a 1600 by 1600 array. This takes several hours to develop. And you'll also see some automatic collaging, mashing up images whose provenance I will reveal later. So our kind of enterprise is called Oi, Algorithm, chew on this, essaying the noise between human and algorithm. And it features us. I'm going to say a little bit about the background to it, a bit about the methods that we're going to employ. We're going to outline some of the anticipated things that we intend to make. And there'll be some preliminary showings of things we have already. We'll discuss our next steps. We will present a noise manifesto. Oh yes. I was reading in the art press a few weeks ago that nobody does manifestos anymore except to be ironic about the doing of manifestos. This is a fundamentalist manifesto of Soviet character. This is a manifesto, right? And then we'll do a little performance. Okay, that's going backwards. And there's an automatically generated collage image. And so first of all, the background to our thinkings. We wanted to draw on various orientations in the social studies of science and technology, and some of these have already been alive in discussion today. The work of Karen Barad and others, to point to the possibility that it would be interesting to explore in this context variable ontologies of human and machine. So what counts as human, what counts as machine, what counts as their relationship are not so much affairs to fix a priori, but to open up a space for creative exploration. Or as we might try and put it here, see if this works, the relationship then between human and machine, the territory in which we're occupying here, is a matter of ontological noise. It's a matter where multiple contributions can be noisily made. And then our work is an intention to map this noisy territory in an open, creative, and hopefully provocative fashion through making things. And another important point I think about Owen and me is that we've admired each other for many years, sometimes close, sometimes from a distance. But we've never actually concretely worked together. So this truly is, as William Blake would doubtless put it, a marriage made in heaven and hell. It's another one of them. So, our methods. So over the last few years, I've become quite imbued with work in design research, and part of the idea of this proposal is to bring some design-oriented research methods to this area. As an alternative, maybe, to the classical, maybe engineering-oriented methods of formulating maybe a research design specification for something to make, then making it, then evaluating it, then iterating, and so on and so forth. And through the evaluation of a make, reflect on the qualities of the theory. So, as an alternative to those kinds of ways of doing classical sort of human-computer interaction work and so on, to do a design-oriented form of work, very much led through making things. A kind of orientation which is sometimes referred to as research through design. In past work, I've kind of made a couple of contributions to this field. And one of us, I've sort of, we all need a little sort of trademark phrase. And my rather lame attempt at this is many makings. A way of advocating an approach to design and development work which emphasises creating a large number of small things very quickly, a large number of different things, and then reflecting upon their relationships and putting it before the public in very short order. So typically I've done projects which have taken 2 or 3 days, have made a ton of stuff. Sometimes these have been collaborative projects, sometimes not. Sometimes with other artists and researchers, sometimes with the great unwashed public. And then putting together some kind of performable form that's suitable for this. And also another kind of element that I've been concerned with is how we might reflect upon a corpus of design-led work to speak to the concerns that various communities, including academic communities, have. Now I say speaking to concerns rather than testing theory or exemplifying theory. Speaking to concerns is a kind of more open way of talking. And another thing that I think which I've already hinted at really, but this is in both Owen and my past work, and also Simon's rift in this area as well, the idea of thinking about performance or installations as ecologies of artifacts, and see if there's a way of thinking about performance or installation work which is a fellow traveller with this approach to many makings, so that you, through this, sort of have a kind of end-to-end working method. There's some past work cited there that I've been involved with and that Owen's written. I do draw your attention to the Bowers, Bowen and Shaw article. It badly needs citations. It's a work of genius. Badly needs citations, as the internal ref told me. So, Owen, you're going to talk to these kinds of provocations.
Yes. So whilst we were riffing, the way this came about was after the Belfast meeting, John manifested in my Facebook Messenger and said cryptically, I am cooking something up, and suggested that we exchange we develop and exchange the set of makes that we're going to show you in a moment. So having done that, we then needed to kind of knock it into some kind of form, particularly as this was before Alice and Paul had graciously announced that there was some money available to help make such things happen. And I guess these are the thematics that emerged from the kinds of silly ideas that we had in isolation and put together. So the first, actually before I say that, another thing to emphasise is I think these aren't ideas plucked ex nihilo from the heartstrings of muses. These are currents that have been present in our work and in other people's work for a while. These are types of being playful with the sort of the technical background of machine listening and what have you that are out there. So this is a first mapping, I guess. So first is to treating an algorithm as something that might be there to try and identify order against a background of disorder, and look at various optics that refracts through. So the first is, to the extent that machine listening algorithms that are musically concerned must at some point, presumably, have taken a stance on what counts as music, that's there to be engaged with in a destabilising, or at least in a playful way. And of course, there's a wide spectrum of the extent to which that takes place. There's all kinds of, I guess, demo patches that come out of things like SMC and what have you that might have what seems to be a fairly grey idea of what consists of music. So you have 12 very well identified pitches and a set of dyadic rhythm measurements and what have you. And of course, they're quite easy to screw around with. And you know, things move gradually further into more playful territory. The second, of course, is to treat noise, whatever that might emerge as being in some particular playful context, as being its own kind of informative thing. So to play with the idea, and I think this echoes perhaps Hans' ambivalence about information theory, is to be playful with the idea that signals are things that contain information, and that there's a well understood transmitter and receiver at work in these kinds of things. Because of course, for the purposes of musicking, they're out. It's constantly in a state of being generative. The third is, I don't know how we ended up with not one but two foreignisms in there, but to make anti-Brexit is to take some of the sort of high-level work that's going on, and I was particularly interested in destabilising musical emotion identifiers, which I think I might have actually seen in the piece of yours, Palos, that you did with Nick Collins UK at 9. Didn't you do a piano piece? Piano duet at Goldsmiths.
No, he did a piece in the same concert as me.
Right.
It was based on that.
Right.
No, I played in the same concert. I remember it. I was
Right.
involved.
Sorry for misremembering. But I mean, the idea that there might be such a thing as stable emotion tracking music is obviously ripe for mischief. And Nick is, of course, very good at mischief. And finally, I guess to look at some of these sort of emerging big data things, so sort of massive clustering and indexing things, which are there very explicitly to try and make order of a very certain, normally commercially driven kind, and repurpose those. That's the four clusters. I think they'd actually come alive a bit more once we start showing the makes that we propose. So the game was that we each came up with 24 makes in isolation and then showed each other the list. So I think we just jumped straight into that.
Yeah, I think that comes. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have another image.
Yeah.
Yes, there we go.
There we go.
So yours is first, I think.
Okay. So as I say, part of the kind of approach to work that we're exploring is this idea of making, in response to those four provocations, a whole series of proposals for makes, and to be very liberal about this. And then, once we get together and spend some concerted time, see what actually we can knock together. And we're actually going to go through all of these very quickly. We are going to do that, aren't we?
Mm-hmm.
We might skip actually exemplifying. Some of these we actually have examples of preliminary work for, but I'm conscious that time's getting on, and we might just play with the work that we've already done in the performance part. I think that will speed things up. So for quite a few years I've worked on a thing I've called various things, but in its latest incarnation is known as a noise accumulator. It basically works as a live PD application. It sums the entire spectrum received so far and cross-synthesizes this with white noise. So everything it's listened to, it turns into a noise. Another idea, buffer fold. Take a buffer full of sound, fold it again, and overlay to make a noise. Pitch Finder General is a pun I'm particularly fond of, and one day I'll actually publish something under that, Pitch Finder General TM, to specify pitches that are found possibly in non-pitched material, but for noise grains. Von Barkhausen noise is the noise that magnetized particles make when they realign. So magnets in the presence of an electromagnetic field in the presence of other magnets, if you make a noise that you can pick up. Diode noise. Lava Rand is one I'm fond of. This is actually TM Silicon Graphics incorporated, using a lava lamp as a method of generating random numbers. Riffing on the idea of using some kind of fundamentally non-linear deterministic process to generate material. Exploring linear feedback shift registers. Riffing on the domain of cage noises. Some of Cage's pedagogical pieces and ideas about noise. The body in an anechoic chamber. 4 minutes 33 seconds. I did a piece a few years ago called Maximum Noise, where I took a recording of David Tudor performing on Japanese television, 4 minutes 33 seconds, and brick wall limited it. So that, Cage's lesson, that there was always sound. You bloody got it, right? Brick wall limited. And interestingly, of course, when you do that, the actual performative gestures that Tudor does make, the closing of the piano lid, are submerged amongst everything else. Looking at noise sources in other environments, in so-called natural environments, wind, sea, shingle, singing sounds, which I can tell you a little bit about if you want. Proposal to make a lo-fi flatliner, the anti-Schaefer, which turns the tuning of the world into a noise. I have a recording which probably will play of a, sort of classic piece of soundscapery, a recording made at the graveside of Joseph Emedy, interesting black English Baroque composer. And I made a recording at his graveside, which I've brick wall limited to turn a hi-fi soundscape recording into a lo-fi noise. Thermal noise, chemical reactions. This is all sort of random circuit noise, oh my God, which you will hear later on. It's something I've been working with over the years. It's a random set of components, job lot bought probably from the stocks of decommissioned Eastern European Soviet power stations, from Maplins, just loads of different components, 9-volt battery put over them and another one to take a signal out, and you hear the random circuits direct. Experiments with inverse noise cancellation, throwing away the signal, keeping the noise. I did an album a few years ago which I called Edison's Residue, which took Thomas Edison's recording of Mary Had a Little Lamb and removed the inventor's voice and just left the noise behind. Whistlers and other atmospherics, radio noise, radio emissions from Jupiter. We'll play you some recordings of that sort of provenance as well in our performance. Other phase change noises, cryptographic noise, vocal noise. I have something which also you'll hear later, which is a voice synthesizer which is made out of the sibilance of the great Joe Meek's voice when he was interviewed in the mid-1960s about his earliest childhood experiences with recording technology. And I just took the sibilance out of his voice to make a noise voice synthesizer. Generalizing ideas of distinction between pitches and noises, throwing away the pitches. Matt Rogalski's algorithm, where he again removes speech and keeps silence between words. There's a notable piece that he did a few years ago, which took George Bush's statement that Saddam Hussein and his family had 48 hours to get out of the country, and Matt removed the subject up to a threshold, the vocal sounds, and just left the speech in there. And he's done a video edit, and you see George Bush go most appropriately. So various other kinds of ideas of making noise out of stuff to generate problematic material. Also, we've been exploring the kind of nonlinear functions much discussed in chaos theory. And I have a particular fondness for the process equation promulgated by the mystically inclined psychologist Hector Sabini, who wrote a book a while ago about how God was a strange attractor. And his equation you will also hear later on.
So mine ended up being less concrete than John's. A lot of them were titles or instructions, so I was just daydreaming. a lot of them are, I guess, have in common either bringing out the noise in an existing process. So I'm sitting in an online video platform's audio compression algorithm, for example, would predictably enough involve multiple hard-limited uploads to YouTube until something interesting happens. Or trying to unroll otherwise black box processes. So the hoedowns for unravelling adversarial generative networks, Tinfoil and Billy Joel, would take a fairly new piece of deep learning research, which I quite cheerfully don't fully understand yet, and either rectify or just further damage the situation by taking it apart and seeing if we can make something interesting happen by unpeeling it and listening to the innards of this stuff. Some of these might be far too sprawling to actually be done satisfactorily quickly, but I think that's actually within the spirit of what we're doing. The idea is that we produce all of these as quickly as we can and see what comes at the end, and this yields some kind of performable or installable piece.
Did you need Billy Joel? Sorry, we've got enough feed for him.
Sorry?
Did you need Billy Joel?
That was the name that popped into my head when the title came out. I'm not gonna argue with it. that was my muses speaking to me. They said Billy Joel it is. We heard about, we saw DeCipio's name come up in Hans's presentation earlier. I've been engaging with his work for quite a long time. The idea with this one is perhaps slightly counter to the way that Agostino would work, but to actually deliberately plant some kind of modelling process right in the middle of the kind of ecosystemic things he does. So in background noise study, in his piece, you've got a very long delay line that recirculates noise back into the room. In what I hacked up yesterday, you've got the same thing, except that the noise is forcibly separated from everything else. Is that just an alarm or some phone?
Is that your computer?
Yeah. The noise is separated from the rest of the signal using some medium filters and then remodeled using a filter bank. And that was interesting because it was a set of dynamics I felt like I kind of understood in their vanilla form. I don't know what it was. It's just noisy.
Go with it.
Yes. And then some of them just end up being vague instructions like over-engineer something. So we'll find something that we've already made over the week and over-engineer it. I don't really want to say much more about those. I think we should just get on, shouldn't we?
Yeah.
Is that me? No, it can't be. I'm muted.
Lower speaker.
It's not from the water amusement, is it?
It's called Oi, you are going to
Oi, So our next steps with all of this folly is to have two intense... It is that, isn't it? So, oh, that's great. So if it doesn't receive a signal, it does that after a while, rather than just turning itself off. Well, we'll go with that. So our next step is to have two intensive collaborative sessions before the end of the year. One based in Newcastle, one based in Huddersfield. And we'll see what we make. At the end of each of these, we'll bring it together and assemble it in some way in a performance installation of some sort. And again, as I was saying at the outset, trying to think about those performance and installation environments in using a kind of ecological metaphor is our way of collaging heterogeneous material. And that's one of the things we're thinking about. And then there'll be a process of reflection, annotation, analysis, to speak to various concerns. We plan a NEAM paper based on all of this, which I think this year again has its standard deadline at the end of January, and also we'll sort of think about a larger proposal between ourselves and any others who want to come along. Okay, so During the course of working on this, we thought we'd also essay a preliminary noise manifesto, and there's quite a few pieces of musical, cultural, theoretical writing out there. Marie Thompson comes to mind, looking at the concept of noise as a cultural phenomenon, various theorizations of that. And here's our go at this, thinking of noise as opposed to signal. Deassign the noise, long live. Deassign the signal, long live noise. Noise is the unwanted, unwant the wanted, long live noise. Noise is the superimposition of very many signals. We die alone, but we live as many. Noise is boisterousness, dynamism, jump around. Noise is change, the grit in the oyster, the jolt, the mutation. Noise is static, the loss of time. We will live forever. Okay.
Is there a t-shirt?
We'll work on it. So,
Guys, sorry, do you think, is that you making that noise?
Is that
yeah, it's a great feature that it does that when it's presumably when it's not received signal for a while. So we're going to rectify that. We'll give it some signal. So we'll play for a short little while, mixing our algorithms and some prepared material, and then we'll have a chat.
That's a vector within the whole thing. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, I don't think what we're trying to do is run around overturning tables and running away and giggling. Part of the point of this enterprise is to create, I guess, what you called yesterday research scaffolding. So an acute problem, as we see it, I think, I'm going to speak for John, I won't mind, with Nine, for example, and the way that musicians inhabit that ecosystem, is that methodologically it's all a bit impoverished, because partly just from political fallout of the vast imbalance of resources between the Kai people, who've got nice big funded projects, and then a few scraggly musicians who turn up, that there's a kind of normative assumption that you're going to do a very orthodox kind of ACO design. And there's not actually much of a model floating around between music scholars that can twine itself usefully around that. So what I don't think we're doing necessarily is sort of running into the temple to deface it and not have anything further to do with it, but trying to ask seriously how artists can engage with technical milieu in a useful way that's distinctive. Does that make sense? So if the signal, if the old noise ends up becoming a new signal, then that's fine. It's an observation that arises out of a particular engagement.
Yeah. I mean, I think I have a concern with in some ways the question as well. In that the question could also be a recipe for defeatism. Meet the new, same as the old boss. That sounds like a sort of nihilistic sort of conclusion to come to. I think when you side with the denigrated term and advocate it, that's the first step. In fact, this is sort of Derrida 101, isn't it? It's the first sort of step to deconstructing the whole thing and bringing in new concepts which can't be recuperated. But it's the first step. I'd also be more worried by your remark if all we were offering was the manifesto. But I think what's important, about what we're also doing is actually the methodological concern, the way of working, and the way of exploring research concerns through making in a particular style. So I think the manifesto is sort of embedded, or as within that whole sort of practice, that whole different way of working. And I think there's I'm not too worried by good lyrics.
Related to kind of grounding in practice, which I think again is a good constructive response. Would you be willing to extend it, sort of compartmentalizing in a way the sonic component with the meta discussion and presentation? Would it be more thoroughgoing to say when you talk about it, have noisy signals, video signals as well, like palimpsestic text and overlays and basically have that signal be noisy too, rather than this kind of very clear. Here's the meta discussion will be conventional and eschewing noise as much as possible, and then what we're talking about would be embracing noise.
Yeah, I think. Well, certainly. I mean, I'd be surprised if our work didn't. If this is just one aspect of what you're saying, I'd be surprised if our work didn't have certain intermediate characteristics in the way it's worked with. And I mean, indeed, the images I created were intended to actually have a different visual vocabulary to them than what I was sort of critiquing this morning about diagrammatizing things. They were in some ways supposed to sort of exemplify a sort of preference for texture and non-object oriented sort of ways of thinking as well. Yeah.
I think Paul's got a question.
Or rather a reflection maybe. First, thank you for playing manifesto. I love manifestos. There's a few of them. It's always reflection that obviously making noise out of something is losing information in a sense, depending a little bit on which method we're using. And the different conceptual dimensions of, it's a very conceptual approach, and the sort of reflection on how you are destroying it and what you are destroying is, to me, the content. And the thing that will stay in my mind the most is actually the idea of ontological noise that you mentioned early on, between the conceptual flux where we focus our attention, machine, human, in between there, and maybe the next step is sonifying the noise in the conceptual spaces in our discussions.
It's on the list.
I look forward to hear that.
No, you've just put it there. Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah.
So why did you turn that off? Surely that was exemplifying.
Yeah.
Quite annoying.
That proper noise, undesirable.
I know, but it
John,
had its
that was
revenge. It had its revenge.
That was your inner Trump.
Yeah, my inner Trump. We all have inner Trumps. Yeah. But I think it had its revenge because there's some pesky limiter somewhere here.
How did you find the limiter?
I found the limiter. Yeah, there's some pesky limiter here.
All right.
So so the ear-shattering crescendo at the end was not quite as ear-shattering as then. So I think this conspired to switch on a limiter. So, it's going to be silenced. It's going to silence us with some help.
Anyone else immediate one?
During a performance like this, do you mind if there is other noises from the audience?
Of course not.
No, it's quite hard to hear up here. Something else was going on. It wasn't spacious. Simon's got that look on his face, but it wasn't spacious.
No, it's not. It's not that look. I'm just thinking about the politics of noise, and this is a cyclic thing that's introduced culturally, isn't it? It's what people do when they're angry young. It used to be angry young men, but it should be angry everybody. But you're not young. You should have grown out of this by
Younger
now.
than you. I'm younger than you, son.
I know.
By all of a month.
Yeah. No, more seriously, I'm just, if we're thinking about ontological noise and sort of really broadening this out, the inner Trump is becoming outer as well, isn't it? Where are you on misinformation and noise? If this is your political intervention, how do you distinguish what you're doing from the American right?
I actually gave a keynote at a conference doing
Oh,
just
no.
that a few months ago. Yeah. I think it's interesting what's going on with Trump, and also what's going on with some of the discourse around Trump and around technology and Trump and around people like Cambridge Analytics and those organisations, and the idea that our Facebook data is being profiled and we're being targeted with messages designed to appeal to our fears, and there's quite an extended paranoid discourse there involving technology, involving the force of utterance and being the sense of utterance and so on. I think there's a lot to unpick there.
Yeah,
I think
there's
there's
an
a lot
older
to
one.
unpick.
There's an older one going back to the 1980s about speed of information and density of information, and that was, at the point at which all information becomes noise, just because of the speed of its reception rather than because of any inherent quality. And I don't.
I think one thing also I'm doing that we're doing with the Noise Manifesto, I don't know whether it's come back up, I'll plug back in again, is actually the 6 points are, you know, almost an analysis of how the concept's used. So noise is often opposed to signal, noise is construed as the unwanted. Regarding noise as the superimposition of very many signals, you know, like when you think of white noise and you think of it as the superimposition of all possible signals within the bandwidth. Noise is boisterous dynamism. We're kind of like, again, sort of like doing some analytic work there in the guise of the manifesto about the concept of noise and seeing what kind of possibilities there are in that. But this is all a sort of move to open up a creative space for making stuff. And I don't think opening up creative spaces to make stuff is Trump.
No.